Welcome back to Billionaire Success Lessons. Today, we are telling the story of a man who did not rise by chasing trends from the sidelines. He did not become powerful by being the loudest person in the room, the most polished celebrity on stage, or the kind of businessman who only looks strong when the cameras are on. He built his success in one of the hardest arenas in the modern world, automobiles, where ideas are expensive, mistakes are brutal, competition is relentless, and the future belongs only to those who can survive years of pressure without losing their nerve. This is the story of Jianjun. And what makes his journey so powerful is not only that he became a billionaire, it is the way he became one. Through discipline, through risk, through manufacturing, through patience, through the willingness to take over something weak, unfashionable, and fragile, and then stay with it long enough to turn it into something the world could no longer ignore. That is the kind of success many people talk about, but very few people are actually willing to build, because most people love the image of success. Very few love the long, difficult middle that creates it. Jianjun's story begins with one of the hardest types of opportunity. A struggling business that looked more like a burden than a blessing. Reuters reported that Great Wall's predecessor was formed in 1984, and that in 1990, when he was only 26 years old, Jianjun took over the indebted company. That detail matters because it tells us something important right away. He did not enter a perfect situation. He entered a broken one. He did not inherit certainty. He inherited pressure, and that is where the first lesson begins. Some of the greatest opportunities in life do not arrive looking like opportunities. They arrive looking like problems. A weak company, a struggling team, a neglected market, a hard industry, a situation other people would rather avoid. That is often where real builders appear. Because builders see what something can become, not only what it is at the moment they first touch it. Imagine being 26 years old and stepping into a struggling automaker. Not a glamorous startup, not a clean new company built around your own comfort. A difficult business and a difficult industry, full of debt, full of uncertainty, full of technical and operational demands. That kind of beginning would scare most people away. But sometimes courage is simply the decision to stay where others would run. And Jianjun stayed. This is one of the deepest truths in his story. Success is not always about finding the easiest path. Sometimes it is about accepting the hardest responsibility and refusing to let it defeat you. The automobile business is unforgiving. It does not reward fantasy for long. You cannot bluff your way through. manufacturing, you cannot talk your way past engineering failure. You cannot rely on image when your products do not work, when your supply chain breaks. When your quality falls, or when your strategy misses the market. Cars are not slogans. They are systems. And systems expose the truth. That means anyone who becomes truly powerful in this industry has usually earned that power the hard way. Jianjun seems to have understood something early that many leaders only learn too late. In a tough market, you do not win by trying to be everything to everyone. You win by choosing your ground carefully and becoming hard to beat there. That kind of thinking would become one of the defining patterns of his life. When people look back at giant companies, they often imagine the road as obvious. They assume the winners must have known exactly what the future would look like. But real business does not feel like that when you are inside it. It feels uncertain, risky, messy, expensive. You make decisions without perfect information. You move before the reward is visible. You commit before the crowd agrees that you are right. That is why judgment matters so much. And in Jianjun's case, judgment appears to have changed everything. Reuters later described Great Wall as an early mover in China's SUV boom, and said the Haval H6 had topped sales charts going back to 2014. That tells us that Jianjun did not simply try to build a generic car company. He moved into segments where the company could develop real strength, especially pickups and SUVs, and then kept pushing until that strength became identity. That is another lesson worth remembering. The strongest builders do not only work hard, they choose their battlefield well. That matters in every area of life. If you spread yourself too thin, you stay average. If you find the right lane and go deep enough, you become difficult to replace. Jianjun did not just want Great Wall Motor to survive. He wanted it to become known for something that is a much higher level of thinking. Survival is the first goal of a struggling company, but identity is what allows it to rise beyond survival. And once a company finds the right identity, everything changes. Then the work has direction. Then the product has meaning. Then the market begins to remember. This is how small, overlooked players begin to turn into serious competitors. But identity alone is not enough. In manufacturing, every promise has to be backed by real execution. Design has to meet quality. Strategy has to meet production. Ambition has to meet reality. It is one thing to choose a direction. It is another thing to build systems, people, discipline, and endurance required to keep moving in that direction year after year. That is where many people fail. They love the first decision, They do not survive the 1,000 difficult decisions that follow. Where Jianjun survived them. And that may be one of the strongest reasons his story matters so much. Because if you look closely, his life is not the story of one lucky breakthrough. It is the story of long-term seriousness. It is the story of someone who kept taking a difficult industry seriously enough for decades, that eventually the industry had to take him seriously too. That is how durable success is built. Not in one dramatic moment. Not in one headline. Not in one hot year. But in repeated execution, repeated discipline, repeated adaptation, repeated refusal to collapse when the business becomes harder, larger, and more complex. As Great Wall Motor grew, the nature of the challenge changed. In the early stage, the problem is survival. In the middle stage, the problem is scale. And in the later stage, the problem becomes something even harder, relevance. Can you keep evolving? Can you adapt to market change? Can you survive industry transformation? Can you move when the world moves? That is where many former winners fall behind, because the market never stays still. And the auto industry moves faster than almost anything else. Consumer taste changes, regulations change, technology changes, powertrains change, global competition changes, supply chains shift, new brands appear, old advantages disappear. What worked yesterday can become a weakness tomorrow if a company becomes too proud to change. This is where Wei Jianjun's story becomes even more interesting. Because Great Wall Motor was not only trying to defend old success, it kept trying to reposition itself inside a changing future. Great Wall's 2025 annual report said the company sold 1,323,800 vehicles in 2025, with 506,800 sold overseas, and that new energy vehicle sales reached 406,000. The same report said revenue hit a record RMB 222.8 billion. These are not just big numbers. They show a company still trying to evolve inside a global auto industry that is becoming more competitive and more electrified every year. That matters because it reveals something deeper about Wei Jianjun's leadership. He was not simply trying to preserve a company. He was trying to keep it alive inside the future. And that is what all serious builders eventually have to do. It is not enough to win once. You have to keep changing without losing yourself. That is hard, because change creates discomfort, and discomfort reveals character. When a founder leads through one era, people praise him. When he leads through multiple eras, that is when you begin to see whether he is truly exceptional. Wei Jianjun's story suggests that he understood this challenge well. He did not stay trapped inside one phase of automotive success. He kept navigating through expansion, brand development, and new energy transition while Great Wall Motor's global scale kept increasing. That is one of the most valuable lessons in this entire story. Real strength is not just the ability to build, it is the ability to rebuild while you are already big. Small companies can change quickly because they have little to lose. Large companies often become stiff because success makes them defensive. But the companies that remain dangerous are the ones that stay hungry even after they have already won. That hunger is rare, and it usually comes from founders who still feel the pain of the early years. People who remember what weakness felt like. People who remember what it means to fight for survival. People who do not let comfort make them careless. Jianjun's life gives that impression. Not the impression of a man who stumbled into easy money, but of someone shaped by the harshness of manufacturing, the seriousness of competition, and the burden of long-term responsibility. That is why his success feels different from the success of many fashionable entrepreneurs. It is not built on hype. It is built on industrial weight. And industrial weight is heavy for a reason. It means factories, workers, suppliers, tooling, capital expenditure, quality systems, testing, after-sales networks, global logistics, brand risk, market cycles. When you build in that world, you are not playing with ideas alone. You are carrying consequences. That kind of life forces maturity. It teaches that decisions are expensive. It teaches that the market can be cruel. It teaches that confidence must be backed by competence. And because of that, it produces a different kind of success story. A quieter one, a harder one, a more substantial one. For anyone watching on Billionaire Success Lessons, there is something deeply encouraging about a story like this. Because it reminds us that you do not have to build in a trendy category to build something huge. You do not need the world's attention. At the beginning, you do not need your early opportunities to look glamorous. You do not need your first chapter to look easy. What you need is this: the willingness to begin where the conditions are hard, the judgment to find the right lane, the discipline to keep improving, the endurance to survive the long middle, and the humility to keep adapting when success arrives. That is enough to create extraordinary outcomes. A lot of people spend their lives waiting for a perfect opportunity. But a perfect opportunity often does not exist. What exists are imperfect situations, hard situations, messy situations, underestimated situations. And sometimes the person willing to master that imperfect situation becomes the one who wins. That is what Jianjun's life shows. He walked into a weak company. He chose a hard industry. He built through years the world would never celebrate. He pushed into categories where a great wall could become strong. And he stayed with the work long enough for that strength to compound into scale. That is not just business. That is character. And maybe that is the deepest lesson of all. Because beneath the billionaire rankings and company reports, his story is really about the value of seriousness. Seriousness toward work. Seriousness toward quality. Seriousness toward long-term thinking. Seriousness toward building something that can survive pressure instead of just attracting attention. The world often notices flashy people first, but in the end it usually depends on the serious ones. And seriousness compounds. One disciplined year becomes 5. 5 become 10. 10 become a reputation. A reputation becomes trust. Trust becomes scale. Scale becomes power. That is how ordinary-looking effort becomes extraordinary influence. So when you think about Wei Jianjun, do not just think about a billionaire from China. Think about the 26-year-old who took over a struggling automaker in 1990. Think about the patience required to build through years of manufacturing pressure. Think about the judgment required to move into pickups and SUVs before the market fully rewarded that strategy. Think about the persistence required to stay relevant in an industry that never stops changing. Think about the chairman whose company sold more than 1.3 million vehicles in 2025 and generated more than RMB 222 billion in revenue because he spent decades taking the hard work seriously. That is the story of wage. Not just a story of billions. A story of pressure. A story of judgment. A story of discipline. A story of and a story of proving that some of the most powerful people in the world are the ones who build real strength in places other people were too impatient to respect.